Welcome everybody to the briefing session in advance of the July Ordinary Council meeting. It's important, as always, to spend a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation, and their ongoing contribution to our community here in Bassendean. Also, just a reminder that our briefing session is live streamed to the internet and recorded, so any members of the public who wish to speak, just be aware that that is happening, and we're doing it in the interest of transparency and openness to the community. Attendances and apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Bob Brown. I don't believe there are any others. Deputations. We have a deputation this evening on item 6.3, which is the amendment to the concrete batching plant. So we have Nathan Stewart from Row Group and Phil Hobbs from BCG, who would like to come and present to us briefly on the side. So would you like to come and join us, gentlemen? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. So I just wanted to quickly speak on item 6.3. I'm here tonight in support of the officer recommendation, albeit just with a minor alteration to the recommendation, and I do have an alternate wording of that I can distribute if need be. So, like I said, we support the officer recommendation, but this application is just for what it is, an amended application to a development approval that's already been issued. So the application sought the removal of conditions 6 through to 10 from the latest development approval, which was issued in March last year. The officers support the removal of those conditions, as you've seen in the report, and recommended some additional conditions be imposed to help manage the development. We're supportive of all those new conditions that the town's recommended, and we are of the view that we can implement accordingly. But just for administrative purposes, with an application of this nature, generally a decision isn't issued with the whole list of conditions again. Rather, a resolution is passed that just simply removes those conditions and adds in new conditions with new condition numbers for the new conditions. And then the resolution would refer back to the original decision of council for all the remaining and unchanged conditions. So that's what I've asked for council to consider when it determines this application in the coming weeks. We're here to answer any other questions that you might have relating to the site and the development and this alternate recommendation. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Everyone's just reading your alternate at the moment. Ask these gentlemen questions when we get to the item. I'll ask the staff any questions. John, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask on the Good Creek battery plant? No? Nothing? Looks like you're off the hook. Thank you for your time.
Okay. No, thank you. Just leave that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so there's no more deputations. So item 4 is a declarations of interest. Do any councillors have anything to declare at this point? No. Addresses by members of the public. Is anyone that would... Mr. Kay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bruce Kay, 11 Ellsbury, Bassendean. Two items that I'd like to address the council on tonight. The first is the proposal for replacing the power system in Eden Hill with an underground power. I'm a bit either way, having been involved in some of these schemes, but I think if we're going to go that way, then the scheme will need to consider the additional power demands for future electric vehicles. And those who don't know it, roughly an electric vehicle charging power demand is about the same as the household usage. So if you're a modern family with 2 electric cars, then you need nearly 3 times the power that you currently have. And I think people probably don't realise generally that the power consumption in households in WA went from about an average demand of about 2.9 kVA in 92 to about 6.5 kVA or more in 2008. In other words, 3 times. We're using a lot more power, so the system will have to be substantially larger. The other thing that I would like council to consider when this is being discussed is the fact that we do have a planning scheme amendment document underway in which parts of Eden Hill will have a higher density and would use more power. My experience of power systems, old overhead powers which people may not like, but they're actually very good for power because you can run them at about 3 times the design load before they melt, and that's because the cables are up in the air and can dissipate the heat. However, a buried underground cable can only run at about 150% of design things before the heat dissipation doesn't work and they melt. So when you're doing a power system like this, it needs a lot of thought about it, and basically slightly larger cables aren't that expensive once you deal with trenching or non-invasive placement, but it needs to be put in, and things that I've done in the past on projects is to put in larger cables to provide for the estimated future demand, but not the switchgear and the transformers until they're needed. So you spend a bit more money on the cable rather than expensive recabling at a later time. So I would like to urge council to have these matters considered in the discussions on underground power in Eden Hill. Second matter I'd like to address council, it is not on the minutes, which is a disgrace, but in the April meeting of council adopted a proposal to receive a report on Scheme 4A, and that was to be prepared and brought forward. This is July. I'm not aware of every document, but I've not heard of any such document being public or available or in process. I'm aware that Mr. Reid, our former director, is, I believe, leaving before the end of the year, and although he supports that Mr. Buttle is a full, knowledgeable person, which I respect, but Mr. Reid does know the scheme inside out, and I would like to think that council will put some pressure on staff to have this report prepared and come forward so that all the residents can view the report and make a report, and if there are any questions we can ask Mr. Reid perhaps before he departs.
Thank you. Our CEO has just informed me that there's a councillor workshop scheduled for August so that everybody has a common understanding of 4A scheme, and then there'll be a report coming to the August or September meeting.
August. It will follow from the August workshop.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I
Yeah.
did. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I look forward to the report.
You're welcome. Any further comments? Okay, so we'll move on to the reports. So we might deal with item 6.4 first, which is the proposed change of use, because we have Alison Healy kindly present this evening in case there are any questions that arise that our officers can't answer. So this is the site inspection that council has just attended for the proposed exhibition centre on Railway Parade. Are there any questions on this item?
Oh.
Councillor Gandel.
Yes, I did have a question, thank you, Your Worship. Just in relation to the exhibitions space, I think we all who were there unanimously support it and love it, and the concept's great. And just with when they have different events and stuff and the like, with toilet facilities, I forgot to ask that question when we were on site, that would just be a case of bringing in potentially portaloos or something if it's a larger event or exhibition.
Facilities on site to cater for the number of people anticipated, then that would have to be done as part of the processes that need to be worked through separate to the planning application process.
Can I then just ask, is it Alison? Is it Alison? Can I ask Alison, is there plans to incorporate toilets into the actual exhibition space? I forgot to ask that when we were on the site.
Yeah, so the facilities that you saw around the side there,
Yes.
there are facilities there. There are also extra toilets in the centre of the site as well.
Oh,
And
okay,
areas
yes.
that were existing have been refurbished. So
Wonderful.
I believe the toilets on site can cater for at least 5 people.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Other questions? Easy. All right, thank you, Alison. Appreciate you being here. Okay, councillors, we'll go back to 6.3 now, which was the topic of the deputation, so the amended application for development approval of the concrete batching plant. Any questions for our staff on this item? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Has staff had an opportunity to see the alternative proposal, and I was wondering if you've got any information about
We did through the chair. We've had a look at it and the outcome will be the same. It's inconsequential in that sense.
I had a question about, so there's a reference in the report to an existing safety concern to do with the trucks not being able to stay lane correct, and I note that the staff are putting in place something to address that. I'm just wondering how that comes about. Is that something that when the initial application was put in wasn't clarified, or how does something...
Again, through the chair, the issue with that is it was identified through their sweat paths that they provided through the updated traffic assessment in this application,
Right.
where their material trucks weren't actually staying lane correct. I don't think that information was provided previously as part of the previous applications. We've identified it, and because they are increasing the vehicle movements, we've suggested that they have the condition to widen the crossover to address that issue, because it is an existing issue.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and I appreciate you picking it up. I guess the basis of that question was there's a safety issue that's been identified now because the information wasn't provided at the beginning. Is there any additional information that we really need to know to avoid having safety issues come up at a later date that we're not anticipating at this point?
Through the chair, particularly from that aspect being a traffic one, no. I think further clarification on that is that Wick Street extension was planned to go through to Jackson Street when the original application was put forth, and they were actually coming in off that Wick Street access, and that would have had a wider turn, which would have made vehicles more safer, the movement safer,
Okay.
and because that Wick Street extension isn't going through, that's also how the issues come to light.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you. Other councillors have questions? Okay, I'll ask another one then. There's also the reference to the water licence, and it notes that the town is not the responsible authority for issuing or regulating groundwater licences, and should the proponent require additional groundwater, they would need to obtain approval. Is there a way that that's monitored so that we can ensure that an approval is, or a licence is sought if required?
Again, through the chair, it's my understanding the DY do monitor that the licences and that experience is coming up on my dealings in Swan, and the licence is out in Swan Valley, and they do monitor that quite regularly. It is good.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
I note the comment on page 17 of the Washdown Stations that no extra are required, and I'm trying to understand how that equates to extra production levels, because obviously the production capacity of this plant is well in excess of the actual production levels that were given to us when we first had this application. So I'm trying to understand why there is no requirement for additional washdown stations and also settling ponds for the wastewater.
Through the chair, with that one, in terms of the washdown stations, they aren't proposing any additional work, so they're just looking to remove the conditions as part of this application. With that, in terms of the actual plant capacity, so while there was the limit of 375 cubic metres for the day, that doesn't necessarily restrict them to their hourly production. So their hourly production working in terms of the operations of the plant is about 100 cubic metres an hour. So in theory, they could reach their capacity within 3.5 hours based on the limit that we've given them. So in terms of the washdown bays, they're not proposing any additional washdown bays, and that is a natural way for the plant to slow down. That answers your question. In terms of the wastewater materials or wastewater issue that you raised previously with us, we did consider that and we did get further information from them. In terms of the water level associated with the washdown, it is all reused on site. The capacity of about 100 cubic metres an hour is, they need about 20,000 litres of water. They have two 40,000 litre tanks for the wastewater to be reused, and then two 40,000 litre bore tanks, which will all be reused in that process.
Thank you.
And in terms of the, sorry, I'll try to expand on that. In terms of the plant design, it's designed to operate about 100 cubic metres an hour. And that's what they're expecting as well. So in terms of the slow pits and the wastewater tanks, we've got that capacity for that, well in excess of what we've currently put on in terms of conditions.
Thank you. Another question? No?
I just wanted to ask a question about the sensitive land use. And with the Bindaring concept plan, there was a map that indicated where a lot of the pollution was coming from around the town. I couldn't remember if that quite reached the batching plant, and if that pollution would find its way down into the wetland, or if there are, like the train line is obviously a buffer. I'm not sure if that was something that had been considered, given that we now have that extra information about that catchment.
Through the chair, excuse me. I'd have to check exactly where the drainage sump alongside this site does drain to. We have had information from our environmental officer that there are elevated contamination levels within that sump, but the advice that we've been provided with is that those elevated contamination levels well predated the concrete batching plant that is now operative. So those contamination levels or those contaminants are not coming from this plant. We have also in recent days, the town's environmental health officer has also inspected both the site and the sump and has not been able to ascertain any sort of dust or other material that is moving from the concrete batching plant toward that adjoining sump. So I'd have to take on notice exactly where that sump finally drains through to, but in terms of contaminants in that sump, there's no evidence to suggest that anything is originated from the concrete batching plant.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask a clarification question? So in the report, it's referencing the penalty for contravening any part of the regulations, and it makes note that it's DEWA's responsibility to enforce. Do they proactively monitor these kind of developments, or how does that come about? Is it if someone makes a complaint? How does any enforcement or monitoring occur?
The chair might take that one on notice
Okay.
from them, but to my understanding, I think they believe they work on a complaints basis, but I can confirm with them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hamilton?
In respect to the buffer zones, which I was always given to understand were tied to the production levels, and now the proposal is to take off any restrictions for production levels. So I know that a dust report has been done and various other reports have been done, but I'm curious about how these reports can estimate future consequences of increased production and how that impacts on what should have been buffer levels for this plant if the controls are removed.
Through the chair again. In terms of the buffer distance, it's just a generic guidance of 300 to 500 metres, and that's in the absence of site-specific technical studies, including your acoustic report, any dust management plan. In terms of the acoustic report, they've done modelling as if they're operating at capacity for 24 hours a day, which would suggest that they're compliant, and that modelling is based off the existing works that are occurring on site. So from a noise perspective, the town is satisfied. And they're the two main issues under the guidance of the buffers is noise and dust, so we've ticked off the noise there. And with regards to the dust, it's looking at the management practices to ensure that if the plant's operating at a maximum capacity that there isn't going to be a dust issue. Our environmental health officers are satisfied that the works, if they're operating against the dust management plan, it's not going to be an issue. DWA also looked at the risk of dust when they looked at the plant, and the plant with the capacity of, at its capacity of 100 cubic metres an hour, factored in dust, and again they considered it a low risk. In addition to that, they also have to comply with the concrete batching plant regulations, which requires has measures to cover dust and things like that, and does not allow for visible dust across the boundaries, and if they do, they're in breach of the regulations.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any contacts? Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, so back to item 6.1. So this is the Jade App Form 2 application, which we don't have the full report at this stage. Christian, did you... Yes?
Question.
On this one?
Yes.
I was going to say, are you happy for some questions at this point, even though the full report's not present? Yes, Councillor Gangel.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. Just my question, I was interested to know, I believe, I could be mistaken here, but I believe the applicant has requested a change of potential planning use as well. Is that correct?
Thank you. Through the mail, actually, just yesterday, there was a second formal application for development approval received for the site, which is also intended to be a Jade App application.
Yeah.
And that is for a proposed childcare facility on the site. So there are, if that application is to be received, which we did a very cursory overview of that application this afternoon, and it seems to be lacking some information that we will need. But if that application was received, there'd be two active applications on the go for the same site.
And just one question. I'm wondering if do we know, or have we had any feedback that has been triggered by the proposed differential rating that we'll be placing on the block?
I don't think that the differential rating is a factor with the application. The property owners are on selling to a developer, and from what we've been told, the developer is looking to keep their options open in terms of the two different proposals.
So can I just get some clarification? They've got one site and they've got two different applications under the same part of land. So how does this impact on the timing of the Jade App sort of approval process, or assessment process, I should say?
So the application for the extension of the previously approved plans will run its course. We need to have our report through Jade App a couple of days after the council meeting next week. Then that will be programmed into a Jade App meeting, and that decision will be made. And then in due course, the same process will be worked through for the next application.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
I note here that it says that the approval was originally 23rd of June 2015, then it was extended for a further 2 years to the 23rd of June 2019. So that's passed, and I'm wondering how have they actually put this application in to extend after that date or before?
Thank you. The application was lodged prior to the 23rd of June. However, the planning regulations allow consideration to be made for extending an approval, even if that approval has expired. So that didn't used to be the case, but even when an application, the approval expires, somebody can now lodge an application to extend the validity of a now expired approval.
Do they have a length of time that they can do that or not?
There is no time frame that is specified from memory, no time frame.
But in the interim, if there's been a change in local planning strategy or something like that, it would then the new strategy would apply, or whatever new zoning? And
That's correct. Yeah. So the key difference with this application is that the Design WA apartment design code, which became operative in late May, this new application will now need to be assessed against the provisions of that new apartment design policy. whereas the original approval and the first extension of the approval were not. And that will probably be the determining factor with respect to this application and the decision that's made.
Thank you.
So, examining it against the Design WA rules, would that happen only if we reject the extension, or would that still happen if the extension is approved?
The examination against Design WA is happening now, and the report will be prepared on the basis of Design WA.
Okay, so they have to meet those guidelines now, if they get the extension.
Correct. Which is not likely to happen, given the planning framework that the design was prepared and originally approved against.
Right. Okay.
Any further questions? Thanks, Christian. Okay, 6.2, proposed adoption of Amendment 11 to the Local Planning Scheme number 10. Councillor Gangel?
Yes, thank you. Your Worship, this is just a very minor matter, but I note in the summary of submissions, I'm interested to see that when somebody provides no comment, the town supports no comment. Should that not be noted rather than support when people make no comment? There's a very minor one, but I think it should be that the town notes that they have no objection rather than support them.
No comment.
Yeah.
Yes, that should be noted.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Hamilton?
Mine's also minor. The officer's recommendation on page 8 of the agenda, point 1 says supports submissions number 1 through to 6. Should that not be notes submissions 1 through to 6? And then the rest of it goes on to, it's in the officer's recommendation, page 8.
Through the chair, I believe it says support because they're not objecting to the amendment. That's the reason, so they haven't actually objected to it.
Okay.
Number 3, they've commented without necessarily objecting or supporting the proposal, and that's why we're noting it.
Yeah, okay. Whatever.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, great. 6.5, Town of Bassendean Dust and Building Waste Local Law. I had a process question. I'm just interested to know why that letter is confidential when the summary...
It's good, Chair. It's their rules and they're explicit. You can see that this is confidential. I've spoken to the committee. I'm allowed to discuss it in general terms, but not provide the attachment.
Right. Because it just seems that most of the information in the letter's been provided in the reporting.
Maybe it's a bit liberal in my writing.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, 6.6, Bassendean Parking Local Law. Wow. Okay, 6.7, parking restrictions on Troy Street in Bassendean.
Are these going to be signs that are on poles on the footpath, or are they going to be on the road? Painted on the road?
Oh, sorry, Shana.
Sorry, through the chair. At this point in time, until the reviewed parking local law is adopted and endorsed and gazetted, they will be signs. Because the marking on the yellow line marking on the road is not part of our local law currently. And because there are time restrictions and certain day restrictions, you can't put that much information on the road, so it needs to be signs.
So just on that point, Shana, I know that the recommendation is to have parking restrictions between 8 and 9, between 2:30 and 3:30. I'm just interested in the rationale of having restricted times. Obviously, the school pick up and drop off, but if there's a safety issue there and people park there at other times, is that...
It's only with the school drop off and pick up, with pedestrian safety, with children coming across the road,
Okay.
and a lot of parents parking there to walk in and pick up their kids.
So it's just pedestrian safety you're concerned about?
It's just the school pick up and drop off times that there's a problem.
Okay, thank you. Everyone happy? 6.8 European House Borer.
Oh,
Councillor Ganjo.
yes, thank you, Your Worship. Actually, it's not on this item as such, but I see that we're requesting the MIC host a regional information session for member councils, and I'm just wondering, another member session I believe we were going to have, or community session, was on weeds. Are we any closer with a date, time, progress? Forum? Yes. Are we any closer? Are we progressing? Is that post October election?
Is that the only opportunity you could find in this meeting?
Yeah, indeed.
I will make it a priority to find out.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
On the topic of European House Borer, though, are there any questions? No? Okay, 6.9, Eden Hill Underground Power. So originally, Western Power representatives were going to be in attendance this evening, but now the plan is to hopefully next week for them to attend the council meeting to be able to brief councillors and provide details. But if there are questions at this point that Phil is able to answer for you, you're welcome to ask them. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand residents in Eden Hill were previously surveyed about the desire to have underground power. I'm just wondering if this is the same area, if there's areas of overlap, or whether it's a different boundary. Do we have that information of which areas were proposed to be put underground last time?
I'll take that question
on notice, but my assumption is that there would be some crossover, but this may be a different area.
There are definitely areas that weren't included in the last proposal.
Right.
Quite large areas. Just before Councillor Wilson asked another question, just in regards to the mapping of the area, when we spoke earlier, I was asking whether there was any maps available to show which areas were already undergrounded, just because the current proposal has quite a unique distribution. Was that map available? If that could be available for the council meeting, that would be very helpful. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, because I recall that the last time the residents in this area were surveyed as to their attitudes for undergrounding of power, a majority of those residents voted no. So this council has passed resolutions saying we're fully in favour of underground power for many reasons, including the ability to put trees everywhere. Would it be possible to also get a copy of any information that was provided to those residents last time as a part of putting together the communications and education program around this, so we can make sure we do a better job than last time?
So just on that point, I'm not sure whether councillors have noticed, but there was a amended recommendation from the staff that's on your desk, and so that has a point in there that says, notes that officers will design and deliver an education engagement strategy to support the underground power proposal and develop a finance strategy for ratepayers, and some other minor changes to the points that are written in the current agenda document. Councillor Quinton, and then you, Councillor Wilson.
So can you explain to me, is there an option for residents to pay back through their rates? Can I have that explain how that works? Is it interest free?
So that is entirely up to the town. So Western Power can't directly charge our ratepayers. It's up to the town to act as the broker in that situation. And I guess one of the things that are really important in understanding that demographic is also their capacity to pay over what period, and that's why it's so important to come up with a finance strategy that supports, I guess, the undergrounding of power and the capacity of our ratepayers to actually pay that, and it would be paid back to the town, so that the town will pay Western Power, and then it's the town's responsibility to on-charge the ratepayer.
And with vacant land, do they get charged the same amount as an occupied land?
Yes, so it's Western Power would pay for the infrastructure, the central infrastructure, and this would essentially be the linkage between that infrastructure and the property, even if the property does not exist at this stage. And we're looking at approximately $2,000 for for that cost to
But
our ratepayers.
Just to clarify though, I imagine that wouldn't be charged until the property was developed. You had a house to connect to. Would that be correct?
I think so. If there isn't a
dwelling,
yeah, there's no.
Can we find that out for sure?
There's nothing to connect to, but yeah, we
But
need to find out.
Is it all in? Because they still get a voting right, do they not?
It is all
They're
in.
still getting a voting right. Why wouldn't they just say no? So my other question is, were there anyone who remembers in the deep dark past about Ashfield undergrounding? Were there anyone who defaulted on their ability to pay? Could we find that out as well, and how we overcame that for those ratepayers?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Just in the report as well, it refers to figure 1 to describe the proposed area. I'm not sure if I missed it, because figure 1 on here refers to the overhead power arrangement, but the actual map of the proposed area wasn't included. Any other questions? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Worship. When do we need to give an answer to Western Power? And also, do they undertake the attitudinal survey directly, or do we?
We're responsible in that regard, so we manage the relationship with our community. Western Power work with us, so it's up to us to determine the undergrounding based on obviously our community's response.
And just to the question of affordability for some residents, so I understand subsidies are available for retirees, people on healthcare cards and such for their rates. Does the state government offer any form of subsidy for this for people who are on a pension or some other form of card?
Well, we can certainly look into that. I'm aware of the hardship utility grants that are available for people that are in financial distress, but we could certainly pursue that as part of the financing strategy.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on then. 6.10, Town Assets Committee meeting. Is that Councillor Gadget?
Yes. Thank you, Worship. I just know here, I just wanted to get some understanding, just in relation to the street tree planting program. It says that 200 trees have been purchased, 85 residents have expressed interest, but I'm just wondering, so is it the choice of those species that they get a choice of? Because I'm just noticing like 2 of them, the spotted gums, or the flooded gum and the spotted gums, says large tree suitable for public space areas. So I'm just wondering, can people have that on their verge, can they? Is that what that means?
Through the chair, it's not envisaged that those trees will be going on the verge, and most people who are putting in their request understand that. These trees are for open reserves, and we've got a strategy to try and to get those 100 trees in the ground also.
So I hate to bring this up again, but the street tree master plan, which we no longer have, so at the moment we're going with a higgledy-piggledy approach to the streets rather than the avenues approach.
I think we call that a natural approach.
Higgledy-piggledy.
So if I recall correctly, the resolution was for where there were existing avenues of trees, we would continue to have avenues on the main entrances and so on, but for the rest of the town, people would be given a choice for the tree. And obviously with guidance from the town staff about what would be appropriate size and soil type and so on.
Higgledy-piggledy.
Councillor Quintin?
I noticed that Anthony Fisk, not Frisk, I'll let him know that it's been written Frisk, from CGM made a deputation. Would we also get to see that deputation, or was that the one he already previously gave?
That was the one that he gave to the committee.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, 6.11, building surveyor determinations. 6.12, development services determinations. 6.13, implementation of council resolutions. 7, there's no motions. 8, no confidential business. Just to bring to people's attention other reports that will come to the OCM. So there's the Jade App for 72 Rowan Grey, which we discussed a little bit earlier tonight. Report on differential rates, the tender for FOGO for the bins and stickers and so on, and the date for the rollout, the Success Hill PSP, and the Whitfield Safe Active Street. Other than that, that is the closure of tonight's briefing session. Thank you, everybody.